Let's begin here. When America tried to corner India, it wasn't just a move on a geopolitical chessboard. It was a miscalculation of human nature, of history, of the way power itself evolves. The United States, for all its might, still clings to the illusion that it can dictate the terms of engagement as it once did in the decades following the Second World War. But power doesn't remain frozen in time. It shifts, it adapts, and it eventually moves toward those who are prepared to bear the weight of it. America failed to understand that India was no longer the tentative nation of the past, cautiously seeking validation. It had become something else entirely, confident, aware, and unafraid to stand its ground. You see, when a great power attempts to isolate another, it assumes two things. First, that its own influence is absolute, and second, that the target of isolation is weak enough to crumble under pressure. Both assumptions proved false. America looked at India through the lens of yesterday, not today. It thought it could summon allies with a phone call, rally global opinion with a speech, and bend the world's markets with a policy directive. But what it didn't realize is that those tools have lost much of strategic autonomy. Those two words sound technical, almost sterile, until you realize they embody something far greater than policy. They reflect a way of being. For India, strategic autonomy is not simply about balancing alliances or hedging risks. It is about carrying within its decisions the weight of thousands of years of civilization. It is about a people who know, deep in their collective memory, what it means to lose independence, and therefore what it means to guard it with every breath. When America tried to box India in, it expected compliance. Perhaps a polite nod, a compromise, a willingness to trade freedom of action for short-term favors. That expectation was born out of habit, because so many nations in the past did exactly that. They became dependent, either on Washington's security umbrella, or on its economic power, or on its political goodwill. But India's DNA is different. India does not wish to live as a satellite orbiting someone else's sun. Instead, it chooses its own axis, its own gravity, its own orbit. And that independence is not arrogance, it is wisdom, because in today's world, aligning blindly with any one power is a trap. It narrows your horizon. It makes you vulnerable to another nation's mistakes, another leader's ambitions, another system's flaws. Strategic autonomy is the refusal to hand over the steering wheel of your destiny. It is the conviction that decisions must rise from within, not from abroad. Think of it as a psychological stance as much as a political one. India has embraced the discipline of saying no, when yes would have been easier. It has walked away from pressure, even when doing so meant standing alone. That strength comes not from defiance for its own sake, but from clarity. Clarity about who it is and what it stands for. To be strategically autonomous is to be answerable first and foremost to your people, your values, your vision of the future. This is why attempts to corner India always fall flat. You cannot isolate a nation that refuses to be caged. You cannot dictate terms to a people who have endured centuries of foreign dominance and resolved never to repeat it. Strategic autonomy means India will partner, but it will not submit. It will cooperate, but it will not conform. It will listen, but it will not obey. That distinction unsettles those accustomed to compliance. It is why America's attempts to exert pressure often feel like they are pushing against stone. The surface doesn't yield. And here lies the deeper lesson for the world. True strength is not in dependence, but in self-direction. It's not in alliances built on fear, but in partnerships born of choice. India has shown that a nation can maintain relationships with Washington, Moscow, Beijing, and the global South, all without surrendering its independence. That balancing act is not weakness, it is mastery. It is the art of navigating a fractured world without being fractured yourself. Strategic autonomy, then, is more than India's doctrine. It is a philosophy that every individual, every nation, should contemplate. To live in this way is to refuse to let others write your script. It is to be polite but firm, open but unshakable, engaged but not enslaved, and perhaps this is the real shock America faced, that India will not be anyone's pawn, not today, not tomorrow, not ever. Because when you hold your own destiny with both hands, you stop asking for permission. You start leading by example. Economics has a way of exposing the truth that politics tries to conceal. When America attempted to isolate India, it did so with the expectation that pressure would weaken New Delhi's hand in global markets. The belief was simple: limit access, reduce opportunities, and you will make the target bend. But here is where the irony unfolds. Instead of shrinking, India expanded. Instead of being starved of opportunity, it found itself in greater demand than ever before. What was designed as a punishment became an invitation, and the world's investors answered it. The backfire was profound. Corporations searching for stability in an unstable era began to look toward India not as a backup plan, but as a central pillar of the global economy. Supply chains disrupted by politics in China suddenly found a new home in Indian factories, ports, and digital networks. Global finance, long hesitant to move too heavily into South Asia, began to see India's billion-strong population as not just a market, but as a force of economic gravity. The very attempt to weaken India highlighted its strength, and the spotlight only grew brighter. This wasn't a coincidence. It was the natural consequence of resilience meeting opportunity. For years, India had been quietly building the foundations: investments in digital infrastructure, reforms in business, growth in innovation and technology. These were seeds planted long before the storm. When the storm came, those seeds sprouted into towering trees of confidence, and the world took notice. The markets are never fooled by rhetoric. They are drawn to reality, and the reality was that India was not dependent. It was rising. What America miscalculated was psychology. In economics, perception is power. When you signal to the world that a country is being pushed aside, you also invite the question, why? That question led investors, businesses, and even rival governments to take a closer look. And in taking that closer look, they saw opportunity rather than weakness. They saw growth rates that outpaced most major economies. They saw a young population eager to work, innovate, and create. They saw democracy, not perfect, but resilient, offering the kind of stability that authoritarian systems often cannot. In short, they saw potential where Washington had hoped they would see risk. This shift revealed something deeper about the global order. Economic power is not simply the result of dominance. It is the result of trust. And India had earned trust through consistency, through openness, through the sense that it was moving forward, step by step, on its own terms. By attempting to isolate India, America accidentally gave the rest of the world a reason to place their bets on it. That is the boomerang effect of arrogance. The harder you push, the stronger your target becomes. And what does this tell us? It tells us that in an interconnected world, isolation is an illusion. No nation of scale can truly be cut off when others see value in its rise. Instead, attempts at exclusion often generate the very momentum they were designed to stop. India became not a victim of pressure, but a beneficiary of it. And in that transformation lies the story of our times, the era when the old centers of power no longer decide the fate of the new. The lesson is unmistakable. Attempts to limit others often end up limiting yourself. Attempts to weaken the strong often end up strengthening them. And so, As America tried to write India's economic obituary, it unintentionally wrote its introduction as the world's next great engine of growth. That is the power of resilience meeting opportunity. That is the power of a nation refusing to be caged. And that is the reminder to all of us. Strength is not proven in comfort. It is revealed in the moment when the world tries to push you aside, and instead, you step into the light. Geopolitics is often imagined as a game of moves and countermoves, strategies executed from high towers by men and women in suits. But the truth is far more organic. The world reacts not just to policy, but to perception, not only to strength, but to the way strength is exercised. When America attempted to isolate India, the expectation was that other nations would fall in line, that allies across Asia and Europe would nod in agreement, and that countries of the global south would quietly comply. But instead, something unexpected happened. The move acted like a boomerang. It came back not to weaken India, but to unsettle Washington itself. What the United States did not anticipate was how deeply the world had changed. The age of unquestioned alignment is over. Nations, particularly those long overshadowed by Western dominance, are no longer content to be silent followers. They look for balance, for dignity, for voices that echo their own struggles. And in India, they found a nation that did not lecture them, did not attempt to control them, but stood as a living example of independence. The very act of attempting to corner India made other countries see more clearly how valuable it was as a counterweight to arrogance. Across Asia, governments weary of choosing sides between Washington and Beijing began to see India as an anchor of stability. In Africa, leaders recognized in India's rise a reflection of their own aspirations, nations determined to grow without being dictated to. Even in Europe, where loyalties to the Atlantic Alliance run deep, there was a quiet acknowledgement that pushing away India was not only unwise, it was dangerous. A democracy of over 1 billion people cannot be treated as expendable. It must be engaged, respected, and partnered with. This is the essence of the geopolitical boomerang. Pressure applied in one direction generates momentum in the opposite. America's attempt to project dominance ended up projecting insecurity. Its efforts to weaken India's alliances instead gave birth to new ones. Washington's strategy revealed to the rest of the world that India was not just another player. It was a pivot around which a new balance of power could be built. The psychology here is crucial. Nations, like individuals, are drawn to those who stand firm under fire. Respect is not granted to the compliant, but to the resilient. By refusing to bend, India demonstrated the kind of inner strength that inspires others. It was not just about policy. It was about posture, about the way a nation carries itself when tested. That posture became a mirror in which others saw themselves, and they wanted to be associated with it. In the end, what Washington's planners failed to see is that isolation is not created by force. It is created by perception. And perception shifted, not against India, but against the United States. The image of America as a global unifier gave way to the image of America as a power struggling to contain change. Meanwhile, India's image grew, not because it sought domination, but because it embodied balance in a world desperate for it. The lesson is profound. Influence is not about coercion. It is about attraction. When you try to isolate someone and they grow stronger, you reveal not their weakness, but your own misjudgment. And in that revelation, the world begins to rearrange itself. So America tried to draw a circle around India, but the circle did not hold. Instead, the circle broke, and those pieces moved outward, toward New Delhi, toward partnership, toward trust. And in that breaking, a new reality was born. Because in the theater of global power, the hand that tries to push another down often ends up pointing the spotlight upon them. The greatest revolutions rarely begin on battlefields or in parliaments. They begin in the mind. They begin with the way a people see themselves, the way a nation defines its identity, and the way the world perceives that identity. When America tried to isolate India, the shock it received was not merely geopolitical or economic. It was psychological. It discovered that the India it thought it could pressure into submission was no longer the same India that once looked outward for validation. Something profound had shifted. For decades, India was often described in patronizing terms: the developing world, the emerging market, the struggling democracy. The language itself carried a subtle hierarchy, placing India perpetually on the margins of global respectability, as though it were a student still seeking approval from the established masters. That psychological frame was convenient for those who benefited from it. But the attempt to corner India forced the world to look again. And what it saw was not a student, but a civilization. A civilization that had survived centuries of foreign rule, endured poverty and partition, and yet emerged with its democracy intact, its culture alive, and its ambition burning. This was the real disruption, the breaking of the old lens. India no longer appeared as a nation asking, "Will you accept us?" Instead, it stood firm, saying, "We know who we are." That quiet but unshakable confidence is what unnerved Washington most, because the psychology of power relies on compliance, and compliance depends on insecurity. But when insecurity gives way to self-assurance, the old methods no longer work. You cannot shame a nation into silence if it has embraced its own voice, and India's voice began to resonate. Across the global south, countries saw in India a reflection of their own struggle for dignity. They watched a nation of 1.4 billion refuse to bow and thought, if India can stand tall, so can we. That ripple effect was as much psychological as it was political. India's refusal to be diminished became a symbol of possibility for others who had long lived in the shadow of greater powers. This transformation also speaks to a deeper truth about human beings. When you are seen as weak, the world treats you accordingly. But the moment you stop apologizing for your existence, the moment you embody your worth without waiting for external approval, everything changes. That is as true for nations as it is for individuals. India's psychological shift is a reminder that dignity is not granted. It is claimed, and once claimed, it cannot easily be taken away. America's shock, then, was not simply that India resisted, but that India redefined the relationship. It refused the role of subordinate and stepped into the role of equal. That change may not yet be fully acknowledged in Washington, but it has been recognized elsewhere, in Beijing, in Moscow, in Nairobi, in Brasilia. The world saw the shift, even if America struggled to admit it. The deeper lesson for all of us is this: power is as much perception as it is reality. If you believe you are marginal, the world will treat you as marginal. If you carry yourself as central, the world will eventually adjust its view. India understood this, and in doing so, it crossed an invisible threshold, the moment when psychology becomes destiny. So let us reflect on this truth. The mind is the first battleground, and perception is the first victory. America tried to remind India of its place. Instead, India reminded the world of its presence. And the moment you stop asking to be seen is the moment you can no longer be ignored. The story reaches its clearest point here. After every attempt to pressure, to contain, to remind India of some imagined place, in the order of things, America was confronted with a truth it could not escape. India is not a country you can push into the margins. It is not a junior partner waiting for permission to rise. It is a civilization, state, a force that has endured for millennia, now stepping into the center of a world that no longer obeys the rules of the old empires. This is the new global reality. Power is not concentrated in one corner of the earth anymore. It is distributed, shared, and reshaped by nations that were once dismissed as developing. India's very existence at the heart of this shift proves that multipolarity is not a dream. It is the present. And America, for all its wealth and influence, must face this reality or be left behind by it. For decades, the United States operated under the assumption that global leadership was its birthright, that it could write the script, and others would play their roles as written. But India's refusal to bend has torn that script apart. It shows the world that you do not need to choose between dependence on Washington or dependence on Beijing. You can walk your own path. You can define your own terms. And in doing so, you can help reshape the stage itself. This shift is not simply about economics or diplomacy. It is about philosophy. It is about the recognition that no single nation has the monopoly on wisdom, justice, or progress. The old idea that power should flow from the West outward has collapsed under the weight of its own arrogance. The new idea, the one India embodies, is that power emerges wherever people believe in their own agency. And when 4 billion people live with that conviction, the world must take notice. America's shock was in realizing that India did not crumble under pressure, nor did it retreat into silence. Instead, it asserted itself calmly, without bluster, without begging, without fear. That composure revealed something profound. True strength does not roar, it simply stands, and when it stands, others gather around it. But let us be clear. This is not a story about India alone. It is about the transformation of the entire world. Africa, Latin America, Southeast Asian nations long spoken to, but rarely listened to, are finding inspiration in India's stance. They are beginning to believe that they, too, can demand respect without compromise. That they, too, can engage with great powers without bowing to them. The ripple effect of India's autonomy is shaping a global order where no single hand can hold all the strings. And so, America has a choice to make. It can cling to the illusion of dominance, or it can accept the reality of partnership. It can treat India as a rival to be contained, or as an equal to be engaged. The longer it takes to recognize this reality, the more isolated America itself will become. Because the age of dictating terms is over. The age of cooperation, of balance, of shared dignity. That age has begun. So here is the message for nations and for individuals alike. The world will no longer be defined by one voice. It will be defined by many, and in that chorus, the voices that ring the loudest are not always those that shout, but those that speak with conviction. India has shown the world what it means to hold your place, not because it was given to you, but because you claimed it. And in that act lies the undeniable truth. No matter how hard others may try to write you out of history, the final word belongs to those who refuse to be erased. Because in the end, the future does not wait for permission. It belongs to those who dare to claim it.